G'day guys, today we're here with a 79 series Land Cruiser. We've decided to streamline a bunch of our install processes. So, this is your template. Good luck. Nah, just kidding. But in all seriousness, today we're going to be doing a 79 series Land Cruiser install from start to finish. So grab a beer, strap yourselves in, and come along for the ride. So as with all the kits that we sell, all the tools you need are pretty much laid out in front of us here. The kit will come with comprehensive fitting instructions. The snorkel will come wrapped and boxed with everything in the kit that you need. So the silicone joiner cut to size so that all you have to do is slide it onto the air box and it's ready to go. 2 hose clamps, a rubber pillar gasket. So this one here replaces the factory gasket. The factory gasket that exists up in the A-pillar there, the holes are actually quite small and they generally squish and kind of get bound up when you go to put the bolts in. So we've decided to completely replace that to make it a lot easier to fit the snorkel. Some M8 stainless button heads. They just replace the factory bolts there, just look a lot nicer, won't rust, give you no dramas in the long run. This kit and this installation is actually quite simple. Other than the fact that it's quite a long template to cut out, you need very minimal tools. A 10mm socket on a ratchet or a ratchet spanner, and a 12mm socket and essentially a 12mm spanner as well. That's all you need to actually remove this snorkel. The rest of it, you'll just need some 50mm wide low tack tape to tape up the quarter panel, some decent primer. We use the Worth Zinc Rich. It gives us the best results and we've had no dramas at all with any rust or other sort of issues like that. Let's get into it. So first things first, you got to take off the factory snorkel. So we'll get the bonnet open, undo the stuff connected to the airbox, rip the snorkel off, and then start taping the car up. Get ready to throw the template on. So first off, you'll just use a 10mm socket to undo the clamp for the intake on the airbox, and then move on to getting the 12mm head bolts for the snorkel out. So generally I'll remove the front one, the 2 top ones, and then the middle one last, so that the snorkel doesn't drop and possibly scratch the car. So now you can support this with your hand. Got to also be careful because some of these bolts can be quite stripped, and then you'll generally just lever off and pop that off. So there is a plastic clip that exists behind there, but we actually cut this section out. And as you see there, it'll just pop out. Then we just take that other bolt out and we're good to start taping up. And as you'll see here, that's the factory gasket I was talking about. The holes are actually quite small, and the threads, when you're trying to restart them, it tends to be quite difficult because you can't actually see the threads that you're trying to go in. So you think you may be starting straight, but you're not, because finding there's resistance from the factory rubber gasket. So once you've got that intake shroud off, just slide the intake to the airbox off and down and leave it inside the quarter panel. That way when you do cut the guard, you don't have any issues with trying to cut against the plastic. One thing also to note as well, with these threads and with these cars getting a bit older now, the threads can bind up. We also find that the factory position of these backing nuts tends to vary from car to car. Some actually the skin will be half on the nut, so it is a good idea if you do have access to an M8 by 1.25 tap, just to tap the threads to make sure they're nice and clean. You're not going to have any dramas when you go to install our snorkel. If you don't have access to a tap and you don't feel like spending the money, I do recommend getting some anti-seize or copper never seize or nickel, just to help with the bolts going in to make sure that you don't have any binding issues. All right, so now that I've tapped those threads, I'll get a 50mm wide low tack tape. Just try if there's any mess in behind there left from the factory snorkel. All this stuff gets cut out, so I wouldn't worry about scratching it too much. But I'll tape from that back left corner the whole way across the top, just to minimize any chance of scratching when you go to take your tape measurements. We just cut this section out with the factory bolt hole. So with the tape, try to make sure you press it into the factory contour there. because you do have to trim up through it, and when you go to prime it or paint the edge, if the tape's not hard into that section, you'll end up probably painting or priming some parts of the guard that you didn't want to. This thing must be ceramic coated or something. So that is one thing to note. There is some cars that the wax or ceramic coat will mean the tape won't stick very well, so you just sort of got to be careful that if your car is waxed or ceramic coated, the tape's probably not going to stick real well. On a car like this, I'll also tape up the brush bars just to make sure that there's no chance of scratching that area. So one thing to note with the 79 series install, we provide two templates, a rear template and a front template. These have all cross-section measurements like all our other installs. There's two separate measurement points on these. So we measure all the top measurements from this back left corner. All the bottom measurements come just under this contour line here. So this body line, you just sit the tape measure at the back here underneath that body line, and all the lower measurements are from that reference point. And also this front, the 770 just here, is measured from that point as well. Saying that, once we get those 2 points, we then have to join these because you've got that empty space in the middle. So I highly recommend if you have a steel ruler, any sort of ruler or a straight edge, and then you just join those two lines up and cut all the way through. I'll run you through when I go to cut. There is a bracket and a bit of a hinge in behind here that the saw, when we use the air hacksaw, the blade can touch. So I highly recommend drilling a couple of large holes inside your cut area just to allow you to see where that is so that your blade doesn't hit it and try jump out and destroy the quarter panel. So all these measurement points are described in your fitting instructions, but they're also labeled on the template as well. So when you get the template, you'll have to, it comes on a sheet of, I believe, A4 paper, and then you just have to trim inside the black Sharpie line. That way you can re-put the black Sharpie line back out on the car. We tend to use like a medium to fine point just so that you're not ending up with a big fat line that you could end up cutting 2 or 3 mil more material off than you really want to. So that's the rear cross-section mark, which is the top. It's a 65 in, 50 down. And then I'll move to the next front point at the top. So that is 300 across and 110 down. So I'll come here, start at the top. $300 and 110. The rear point, the lower is 260 and 210. So 260 in and 210 down. Always making sure that you push the tape measure into the contours. Now I'll move on to the front points. 550. The first lower point, 510. Down 100. Down 195. Pressing into the contours again. And then the final point at the front, 770. And 155 down. So now that we've got those reference points, we can line the templates up to them, trace them out, and then join the center section. So when placing these templates, I've found that using small magnets, like whiteboard magnets, helps a lot with positioning. And that way then when you're tracing out, you don't have to put a lot of pressure trying to hold the template in place. Just make sure though that you don't stretch the template and you line the marks up and then put your magnets on. And then just trace hard to the outside of the paper template that you've trimmed out. So as you get down to this body line, just make sure you press the template up into the sections that it's sitting, so it's sitting flat against the quarter panel, because if you allow it to come off and down, you'll end up with a much bigger cut. So now that one's done, we'll move on to the front. It's the same deal, get your reference points. front and rear. And then with this one, especially because there's a hollow in behind the quarter panel, just press it in at the front and the back of this radius. Trace it in. And the rear, make sure those points are lining up. And then we'll finish off by joining those two. Right, now that's done, I'll drill these two viewing holes essentially, start cutting that section and then work my way around. Safety first, legends. All right, so I'll drill it just up the back corner. So I can see that section and then just below it halfway through. I can now see where this little bracket piece is that the quarter panel bolts to. I'll cut that section and then I'll cut around from there. There is something to note that in behind this section, there is a double skin where that bolt hole is. So it takes a little bit to cut through here, so just keep persisting and you will get through it. Once it's cut out, I'll show you, you just fold the tab back and cut through it. Helps if you have more than a 1 litre compressor. So that is one thing to note. We're using quite a small compressor. We haven't set this place up. So if you do have a really small portable compressor, it is achievable. It's just gonna probably take you about 20 minutes longer to get the cut done, just because with the duty cycle and running down the pressure, these things use a fair bit of air, but it is doable. You've just gotta be patient. Now you can remove that intake piece. So one thing to note is to make sure the intake's blocked off as well so that no swarf gets in. This is that bracket I was talking about. So you just get your finger on top of it, fold it over, and then we'll run a cut through and just try deburr that edge so the pinch weld can get on nicely. That's the bracket. And then I'll just usually run a light trim on the edge just to help when we want to get the pinch weld on. So now we'll move to the back. The next cut we've got to do is just on the edge of this section here. So where this bracket comes out, you just need to run a cut down there and out the side to allow clearance for the snorkel, and then just cut the long side of the stud off. That way then the snorkel can go in, because it is recessed quite far in the car. We just need to trim these, and those get primed as well at the same time once we do the quarter panel. Instead of using an air hacksaw, we don't have a grinder with us today, but you can use an angle grinder. It will be a lot easier to get rid of this. Just be careful of any sparks that do go flying that land on the paintwork. Will embed metal in the paint, and you'll end up with like rust oxide spots all over the paint. All right, 3 years of cutting, here we go. So now that all those sections are cut, I'll move on to just doing a light cleanup with an 80 grit spiral band. Then after that's done, I'll do a test fit. So we've started including extra pieces of pinch weld so that you can pinch weld just the entry areas that contact to see that you've got a really good fit up. Because this snorkel is so long and the cutout is so recessed, it is highly beneficial fitting the snorkel just to make sure your fit is good, and that if there's any areas you need to address, you can address it, trim either more, get it to sit how you want it, pull it off, clean it up, prime, pinch weld, then we're good to go. So we use 2 bits of pinch weld, one at the entry point to make sure that you don't scratch the snorkel. So I'll cover generally almost back to these cross-check lines, and same here. That way then, when I put the snorkel in and slide it in, it doesn't scratch the powder coat or the stainless finish. So make sure the pinch weld's completely hard up. All right, now that's on. Let's get the snorkel in the hole. Make sure we haven't f***ed up, and we're good to go. So with this, sort of come up and in. With these snorkels being so tight, when you have the finished pinch weld on, you run the risk of cutting the pinch weld and exposing the metal that's in behind the rubber. So just be very careful and put canola oil on as well, just to help get it through. We're looking pretty good. Everything fits nice around the back. Tiny bit of a gap there. Nice and tight up the top. I could probably take a little bit more out of that. But given my compressor situation, I'm probably not going to mess with it too much. The fit up through here is near spot on. Gearbox is good. It's good up there. Perfect. Just take a smidge out of here just so that I don't have any issues getting that in the pinch weld. Tiny little bit of a tight spot there. So it is really important when you find those areas just to mark them. So I'll put 2 check lines, essentially show me where I need to retrim. You can also, I sometimes write an S just to say small, so I'll come back because sometimes you might have a few more places to trim up. So if you don't mark them, you may forget and you may trim some out of an area that you don't want to take it, and you'll end up with a poorly fitting snorkel, which is realistically not the aim of the game. So I'll remark these tiny sections here, trim them up, clean them up, pinch weld, and then we can throw the snorkel on. So now that's all trimmed up, I've cleaned up the cut, we can move on to priming it. I do highly recommend taping this area up a little bit more, just to make sure you don't end up getting overspray all over the car. One little trick you can use too is just to curve it so that any of the paint you spray in this direction will get caught instead of having to just tape flat where the overspray will want to travel past it. So I'll just prime that section that we cut off. Make sure the tape's hard up. This car doesn't seem to want to stick. And just cover, there's a couple of holes in the engine bay, just cover those up to make sure you don't cover the loom in the engine bay with overspray. So once your primer's medium rare, we'll pull this off. So I'll grab the pinch weld. The pinch weld in your kit will be cut to usually about 50 mil longer than you need, so that you can then leave a 10 mil overlap, cut it down, lift it up and push it back so it's a seamless fit. With all pinch weld too, I'll run a straight cut for my start as well. If it is cut on a slight angle, when you go to mate it up to the other piece, you'll end up with a gap, either top or bottom. The pinch weld we sell is directional too, so it's now rolling in. We tend to want it rolling out so it doesn't look like the snorkel's too tight or putting pressure on the quarter panel. So I'll just flip it around and start going the other direction. This pinch weld the smaller pinch weld is quite tight. It does help to sort of roll it back this way at a 90-degree angle and then just push it on. It helps sort of open it up and get it onto the quarter panel. All right, so now the pinch weld's on. As you can see here, I overlapped and then pulled back and then just pushed up so it's nice and seamless. We generally start on the 79s, we'll start the pinch weld down in this section because it is the most hidden. So even though I'll go to that effort there, it's not seen anyway, but it's little details that matter, especially on this sort of kit. So now that that's done, I'll pull the rag out of the airbox and I'll fit the silicone. So I'll spray some canola oil inside the silicone before I put it in, just to make sure when you go to fit the snorkel, because it is quite tight, that you don't have any issues. You just squish it through the hole there, throw the 90 to 110 hose clamp on, and just slide it forward to make sure that it's not going to impede you getting the snorkel into the silicone. 80 to 100 on the airbox, and I'll just knit that up very lightly, because you do want some movement, because you have to start the snorkel so far back and get it in. The silicone has to kind of be pointing towards the back of the hole just to allow it to roll in. Then you can tighten it all up once it's in. So once the silicone's on the airbox, I'll get the pillar gasket and 3 bolts supplied in your kit. Put some nickel anti-seize on them to make sure they don't bind up. And then I'll just put them in position, ready to go. With these bolts, especially on the pillar, it is worth noting that both of these two snorkels, because we offer them for the sun visor for the 79 series and non-sun visor. So when you order your snorkel kit, make sure you disclose whether you have a sun visor, whether you plan on getting one, or whether you don't want one at all and don't have one, because we offer both in the kits. What will change is the bracket fold, and it sits a bit further off the car just to allow that clearance to the sun visor. Because this car is planning on having a sun visor down the track, the customers communicated that to us, and so we've fabricated the snorkels to suit. Now that I'm ready and I've got my tools good to go, I'll throw the snorkel in the hole and be very careful fitting it. The sound of joy. So generally, I'll loosely put the bottom one in by hand so that I don't have to stand here and hold the snorkel. Just get it a few turns in. That way then it's safe, it's not going to fall off the car. And now we'll move on to the top. With the non-sun visor version of our snorkels, you will need a 5mm Allen key that is cut down just to get clearance up in this section between the snorkel and the bracket. So I'd highly recommend going to your local parts store, buying a 5mm Allen key, and just a cheap one that'll cost you 50 cents, $1, and just cut it down to suit to then tighten these bolts up. So what you'll do, you position the bracket insulator that we sell and provide in the kit, and then throw the bolts in. May need to give the snorkel just a little wiggle, just to make sure, always get these started by hand so you don't run into any cross-threading issues. All right, so now that's all the bolts done up. Quick check of the pinch weld, any sections that might need a light push. Because it's so long, it does help to go through with your fingers and just push down any sort of high or wobbly spots, just because it does sort of go a bit wavy. So now that the snorkel's in tight, we've done the pinch weld, I can then blow the car down, give it a quick wipe with some spray wax. We tend to use the FW1 because it gets the fingerprints off the best and gives us the best result. And then we'll tighten up the hose clamps in the engine bay and we're good to go. All right, so they're all tight and we'll go on to cleaning. So with the cleaning process, we'll use a brand new microfiber with the FW1 wax I spoke about. Generally do the snorkel first. This one's Manic, so it's not as important, but with the satin and the gloss black, the fingerprints do tend to stand out a fair bit more. So that, you'll wipe with the wet side and then just wipe off with the dry. And then same with the car, just to get all the fingerprints off, any mess you've made. All right, so now we've cleaned the car down. Everything's all tightened up. So as you can see, there's also a second snorkel over there. We do offer passenger side snorkels. They are completely jigged in 4-inch. Any color you like to match the driver's side. If you have one of our pre-existing kits, just give us a buzz and we can make sure that there's no modification needed. They will suit factory side snorkel. The only thing you'll need to keep note of is, whether you have the sun visor or not. These kits are available on our website. The only difference is that in the instructions and in the kit, you will get 3 extra nut certs because you will actually have to drill the A-pillar and drill into the quarter panel and add those nut certs for those mounting points, because on that passenger side, they do not have any factory mounting points. So I hope you guys really enjoyed this install video. I know the cutting took about 5 hours, especially with this compressor that we had outside, but they are quite a simple kit to fit. They're readily available on our website. They are a really good addition to your 79 series cruiser, and the fact that they cover all of the factory holes that the standard snorkel provide, it means you have a much sleeker look and you'll have a fair bit more induction noise through the 4-inch snorkel. So if you guys are in the market for a really nice 79 series cruiser snorkel, I would say the best on the market, then give us a buzz today or jump onto our website.